I was given the job to choose a fort from Canada and then make a lot of research on it. So let's go ahead and talk about forts. First of all, the fort I investigated all of my stuff in was York Factory. York. When and how was my fort established? Alright. The York Factory is located on the shores of the Hudson's Bay at the mouth of the Hyas River. It was established in 1684 for bringing manufactured goods into North America and shipping first back to the Great Britain. It was originally established as Fort Nelson in the Hudson's Bay Company, but it is known that York Factory was first established as Fort Nelson, but it is not certain when did the factory actually change its name. Now I'm going to describe to you a typical interaction that might have occurred among Europeans. First of all, at the fort there were a lot of people, including indigenous people and of course the British. One of the British was Letitia Harvey. She described a lot of how the factory looked and some interactions she had with the Cree. Also explained how she arrived on Monday the 10th of August. She talked about the indigenous with the term Indians, explained how the indigenous people didn't know anything English or French, and how they would always bring her what she asked for. Also described the factory as beautiful, painted pale yellow, windows and some particular parts white, and some houses had green gauze mosquito curtains outside, and altogether the effect was very good. This explanation showed that even there was a little barrier due to the natives not being able to speak their language, they still worked very well together. Besides all the fights between the French forts, they had a good relationship with the Cree and indigenous people. What remains of the fort today? And is there any information for visitors? Well, yes. Nowadays, the York Factory is a historic site where people can go and learn about the history of the factory and take them around to see the remains of the factory. There is tours and camping for visitors to show everyone the York Factory. Now, to describe the factors that influence the location of the fort, such as the location of the competitors' forts and the access to transportation and resources. Okay. There wasn't any specific northwest fort close or right beside the York Factory, but after some research I figured out some of the forts that might have been the most important at the time and their locations. Like, for example, I'm not totally sure of how to pronounce it, but Fort Amherstburg, later named Fort Malden, located on the banks of the Detroit River near where the waterway empties into Lake Erie. Fort George, located what nowadays is known as Elk Point, Alberta, with connecting supply routes to the bay. Fort William, located in the Kaministiquia River, and Fort des Cedres, location in Quebec, and many more. Why were they established so close to the bay? That's easy. All of their goods that were shipped passed through the area, which means that having York Factory located in their most important shipping and trading area was an awesome decision. Okay, now, the company that ran the fort and the timeline of the operation of the fort. The company that ran the fort was a Hudson's Bay Company, who managed Rupert's Land. Hudson's Bay Company was established in 1670 and built York Factory 14 years later in 1684. The timeline would be, in 1670 the Hudson's Bay was established, in 1684 the York Factory was built, 1821 to 1873 the settlement was headquarters of Hudson's Bay Company's Northern Department. In 1936 Hudson's Bay Company closed it down, and in 1668 owned by the Canadian government and Parks Canada. As for the political state, York Factory was named after the governor of Hudson's Bay Company, James, Duke of York, who later became King James II. British were the ones who were in charge of Rupert's Land. The one in charge to take control over Rupert's Land was King Charles II of England, but its actual governance and fur trade operations were managed by the Hudson's Bay Company, led by its first governor, Prince Rupert of the Rhine. At York Factory, there wasn't any specific factory. There were a lot of people, in fact, but they were very noticeable people that were the ones that took care of it. Like William Hemmings Cook, who served as a writer, chief factors like William Thomason, Matthew Cooking, and later James Harvey. Fort George and Northwest Company in Buckingham House, Hudson's Bay Company, Elk Point, Alberta, along the North Saskatchewan River near Elk Point, Alberta. There were two forts side by side, Fort George and Northwest Company, and Buckingham House, Hudson's Bay Company. They spat on each other and tried to lure away each other's businesses. Fights sometimes broke out. Status was an important thing. The steadier your position was at the fort, the more likely you would dress and dine in style. They wanted to expand and gain more power around the area. Since they established in 1670, the Hudson's Bay Company made goods out of mostly beaver pelts that got sent to England to be made into hats and later shipped back to be sold to the Indians and other Europeans, making this one of the ways Hudson's Bay Company made money and stayed with a monopoly for various years. Lastly, we got our military state. In North America, there was a war known as King William's War. The war centered more on growing tensions of control over the lucrative fur trade between the French and English. It was quite important for the history of the companies like Hudson's Bay Company and Northwest Company. The French wanted to claim the area of Hudson's Bay, and meanwhile the English wanted to take control over the region of Mississippi that was controlled by the French. Most of the fighting was located right on the east coast of North America and Canada, but it would eventually reach the very remote but very important location of Hudson's Bay in the final month, the French decided to take over the York Factory. When the British ship Nonsuch sailed to Hudson's Bay between 1668 to 1669, she was the first fur trading vessel to reach the area that sailed. The formation of the Hudson's Bay Company, to which the British government gave complete control of the entire Hudson's Bay watershed. This watershed was named Rupert's Land after Prince Rupert. And that is it.